Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our talk for this evening, our webinar, Wildflowers for the Queen. I'll just wait for you all to come in. Do use the chat facility to tell me who you are. It's always nice to have a message. Hopefully, other than one to say that you've been waiting since 7 o'clock, as I believe we've had a bit of a technical hitch. Okay. Lovely. So, who have we got here this evening, I wonder? Very quiet this week, Hugo. I think you've stunned them all into silence.
Wondering what on earth Coronation Meadows are, probably, Antonia.
Oh, actually, we've had Sandra. Now, you did get in. I'm really pleased because I know you had a few issues earlier. You're very welcome, Sandra. You've popped it in a question, so I'm going to pretend I've answered that. But Sandra from Kidlington, you're very, very welcome, and thank you for supporting us all the time. You're wonderful. So, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me enormous pleasure this evening to welcome, oh, hold on, we've got Anne and Dave here in Ainsdale Village. Lovely, you're very welcome too. I don't think you're the only people out there though. So it does give me enormous pleasure to welcome Hugo Rittson-Thomas to talk about Wildflowers for the Queen. His new book, which is it's hot off the press, Hugo, isn't it, I believe?
Still red hot, Antonia, yes.
Excellent, excellent. Hugo, I wonder if we could just start, if you could give me an idea of how, what is this project about Wildflowers for the Queen and Coronation Meadows? I'll just get a picture of what we're talking about on the screen there. So what is this? Tell me about it.
It's sort of an interesting combination on the title, isn't it? And it is actually, as it says, it is focused entirely on the wildflowers, and they are dedicated to the Queen because it's a Prince Charles initiative, started in actually the year of the longest reign of the Queen, 2012, and he started it then to try and bring back these incredible meadows that existed and he remembered before really Dig for Victory, the World War II program, which isn't obviously the only contributor, but is where a lot of them went initially, these wildflower meadows, which were very common. And it just so happened I did a portrait, had a commission to do a portrait of the Queen on the celebration of the coronation. So I was at a charity event raising funds at the Chelsea Physic Garden for the charity, in fact. And I just had a sort of epiphany, I suppose, just a moment of awakening, realizing it was so tragic what was happening, losing these wildflower meadows. And I think in that talk with Prince Charles, they mentioned the Monkey Orchid.
Right.
Had been believed to be extinct in 1952. Wow. And then they found this one colony. And when I saw the images, of this monkey orchid, I just had this awful feeling in me that why surely there's something I can do about this. And as a photographer, and by then I'd done probably 4 or 5 books on garden photography, if you like. I just realized if I broadened my range, perhaps I could speak to the charity at least and see if there was a way we could try and bring more attention to bear on them, more awareness. And I think the catchline was to make the invisible visible, both in the sense of the wildflower meadows are, so vital in the chain of life for humans. They're so vital for instance, the pollinators, of which we're all very aware of the threat the bee has been under. Yeah. But that, in fact, is only one of 1,400 pollinators you would get in a wildflower meadow.
Oh,
So
right.
there's such a rich source of biodiversity, you know, the word that never leaves Sir David Attenborough's lips now, and rightly so. And, you know, to make the invisible visible also in the sense of some of these flowers are tiny. In fact, at Blenheim, you have sweet eye, which is literally half the size of your fingernail, of your small fingernail. Mm-hmm. So the photography allows you to get a much better look at them and a feel for what the flower's about, its colors, the shapes. And, you know, I'll come back to it, but I was so excited to actually find a monkey orchid in this rare colony down in Kent. It's public access ground, as 15 of the meadows are, these coronation meadows, and the rest are, you know, the big houses which are open to the public, like Blenheim.
Hugo, shall I move to the next slide? And interesting to come back to the monkey orchid later. It must have been so exciting, you know, thinking that this thing was extinct, and yet, you know, there it was.
Totally, and I mean, sticking. Well, I think we get an image of that later in a little.
Yeah.
Stick on your that's a rather wonderful shot at Blenheim, actually, of the Meadow Clary.
Okay.
It's quite a sort of remote part of the estate, in fact, which possibly is why it's made very, very private. But it's an incredible flower, the Meadow Clary. It's about the most efficient pollinator in the flower world. It has a 95% success rate, because if we go to the next slide, you can see on the right, the light-colored part of the flower is actually the lip. So and particularly the honeybee, which loves its flower, has to land on that. And then the hood part above basically sort of clonks down on top of it as soon as it pushes its head in to get at the nectar, nectar, and then it gets stamped, if you like, on its back with pollen. So the next flower it goes to gets pollinated and has an incredible 95% success rate. So it's a very important flower, very beautiful one. And I think, you know, this reflects the great stewardship really at Blenheim. Not everyone knows about the palace, but I was so impressed how around the palace, the old park had, I think, up to 50 different flowers.
Wow.
I mean, if it'd been a bigger book, I would have included many more. I've got some wonderful shots of harebell, for instance. But because this is such a wonderful flower and it's quite rare, there's only 20 sites really in the UK, so it's a very special site. We focused on that one, and, you know, hats off to the estate for such a successful and diverse stewardship scheme for preserving one of these only 20 sites in the UK.
Thank you. And I must say, it's wonderful. You know, you mentioned before the flower that's about the size of a fingernail. Of course, you know, to magnify it like this with your camera is just fantastic. I know this isn't the one you were talking about, but to be able to see this detail is just tremendous, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's very useful. And then in the next slide, I had just, you know, in garden photography, obviously, I just see the same orchids as anyone else, really, common spotted or pyramid orchid maybe. So to come across, I think there's 8 orchids in the book, these more exotic species, which I'd never seen before, was so thrilling. This one, the lady orchid, was at the charity I work with, Plant Life's headquarters, flagship land, down in Kent as well. And I was quite nervous, you know, having done garden books. Well, you know where the garden is, you can find it. You've got someone who's very passionate about it. You know, the owner's normally is a very keen gardener, so it's very well presented, and all the color and everything's been thought about, you know, very precisely. And so I had this GPS coordinate for the lady orchid in a field. And it's about 1/2 a meter high, this flower. So I didn't expect any problems at all. I couldn't find it. This was day one, and I had 20 more medals to do. So I was pulling my hair out. I thought, what on earth am I going to do? And it took me about 3 hours to find them, because they weren't in the field at all where the GPS is. As you can see in the slide on the right, they're growing on the edges of the wood.
Yeah.
I found one just as darkness arrived, so it's too late to photograph. But as everyone knows, with these type of shots, you have to get up early for sunrise or sunset when the light is less strong, it's less shadows. So the alarm goes off at 4 a.m. the next morning. Go find my lady orchid. I'm very excited, and it's a heck of a flower. And the forecast was right. So the sun was just rising. I'd got my camera set up. It was looking good. And then I hear this crash bang wallop behind me. I couldn't think what it could be, especially at that time of the morning. And this herd of deer came charging through and flattened it. I just thought, this is a good indication of how different it is from photographing gardens. You are dealing with nature at its wildest, and it was really joyful and exciting. And there were obviously going to be setbacks. So luckily, I found another one, and they're a beautiful flower.
Because I would imagine, I hadn't really thought about it. You are kind of at the mercy of weather, as you say, the time of day, etc., and deer and anything else that might come your way.
No, totally. I mean, one of the biggest, enemies is the wind, because you can have a perfect day, but you can imagine that flower 1/2 a meter high, just any wind at all with a heavy head. It's going to be difficult to especially in low light of early morning, lower light in the sunset period, to get a still shot, a decent shot.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I think all those well-known flower photographers like Irving Penn or Robert Mapplethorpe, Nick Knight, only shot them in their studios.
Good. Fair point. Fair point.
Yeah. So next, I think we have another. Yes, that's more detail of the lady orchid. And on the left, I think it's worth looking at the detail of the lady orchid, because I always find it fascinating that they were so named. Because when we come to the man orchid, you'll see it's missing an appendage that the lady orchid has, which might better make it the man orchid. But you can see the colouring and the pattern is really beautiful, and you just wouldn't expect to find those colours, in an English field in Kent.
Mm.
And then we have.
Do you want to go to the next one?
Yeah, I think a different detail, and the next one is yes, the man orchid. So there he's looking very charming and sort of elegant, like a sort of Regency man, the man orchid. He does lack the appendage of the lady orchid, and this. If you go to the next slide, then we can come back if necessary, Antonia.
Okay.
It's interesting where it grows, because it's on the edge of a town, right on the edge. This is it in front of us, and it's a big dog walking area, as most of these sites are. You see the path disappearing into the town. And during the Second World War, because it was higher ground, this was used for the Akat guns, to protect cities, and I suppose London that far out. But it's incredible, the power of nature to come back. So it's regenerated itself. And it's quite a big field of the orchids, as you can see there. And if you go back up one, Antonia, which is the detail of the man orchid, to number 7, isn't it? Does it go back?
Yeah. Okay. There you go. Sorry.
It's really quite an elegant shape and form, and I think they would make a great couple, the man and the lady orchid. But this is, again, another rare site. It's also red listed. So try to shine a light of awareness, at least, on some of the great wonders we have in this country, and especially now travel is restricted. I think it's great. Soon it'll be a great thing to be able to see all these wonderful meadows again, and it's a great success. They are coming back thanks to Prince Charles's efforts and Plant Life's wonderful work.
Hugo, what? Because when you say orchid, that I would never have known that was an orchid if I, happened to be walking by. And it seems to cover a multitude of shapes and sizes.
The orchids do, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. In this country, we have, in theory, 56 orchid types, of which one in a way is sort of semi-extinct, the ghost orchid. But maybe like the monkey orchid, which I say had been classified as extinct. It'll come back. I think it was last spotted in 1982. So there are a lot of different types of orchid. Certain families have like Twayblade, have more, family members that are reasonably similar. But just from these ones, and if you go to slide 9, please. You can see a further range, this being the monkey orchid. And I'd absolutely fell in love with it because, of course, it's not a brown monkey. It's nature at its most theatrical and dramatic. So you've got this colony of pink and cerise monkeys with very lively tails hanging off the stem. And it was quite a sight. I was about to give up on that one too, because there's only actually one in that whole field, Parkgate down again in Kent, because the conditions are right. The soil is quite limestoney there. And they each have a wonderful tail. I mean, like Blenheim's been preserved through the years. This was actually looked after by, I think he was an old retired major. He loved it so much, he gifted it to the council. And they've managed to preserve it, and now Plant Life are looking after it under the Coronation Meadow scheme. So yeah, I was so excited to find this monkey orchid.
Hugo, how tall is it?
It's quite small, that one actually. It's probably I might have to go back to inches. It's about 8
No,
inches.
inches are fine.
7 inches.
About 7 inches, okay. Because it's hard to get mind you, can see the buttercups in the background, I suppose.
Yeah, the orchid is really quite a good size. So.
And is it only found in that part of the country?
My understanding is there are only 2 colonies. Sorry, total of 3 colonies. One, the original one in Kent, and this one, which they're trying to restart. And then there is one in Oxfordshire.
Right.
I didn't actually, because I was down there photographing Ranscombe anyway. I stuck with this one, but I think there's one in Oxfordshire. But you'll probably find it online.
Right. Do you want to hear what Richard E. Grant has to say about the orchid?
I would love to. Because he's speaking about the Ranscombe meadow, the Plant Life meadow down in Kent, which has the lady orchid. Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay.
In the gently undulating folds of the Kent countryside, Ranscombe Farm is a botanical box of delights. There are dark, towering coppices of sweet chestnut trees, woods that whisper in the breeze, wide open fields full of sun and barley, and carpets of fragrant grassland sparkling with colour. But above all, Ranscombe is a poem to the orchid. And there are many beautiful verses: bee orchids, common spotted orchids, man orchids. Ranscombe has something for everyone.
Yes, it's amazing how many people are passionate about, the wildflowers, and I suppose it does represent something quite sort of magical, you know, from Shakespeare time of speaking of sceptred isle, through to the hymns of our green and pleasant lands, that it really has a sort of place in our, you know, in our heritage, and that's really how I see them. I mean, you know, going back to Blenheim, I mean, it's so obvious that the buildings have to be cared for, but the meadows, some aren't, you know, not protected at all. And I suppose what I found extraordinary is there was a chap in the newspapers a lot last year who had five trees in his garden, just his trees in his garden, but they were blocking the light, and he'd been told not to. He cut them down and got a fine of £170,000. Right. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but a wildflower meadow, some of them you could just plough up in an hour, obviously, and there'd be no consequence. So I think one of the aims, you know, is to try and earn them a bit more respect, especially with the understanding now of pollinators, the importance they have, you know, in our life cycle, decline of the bee and the need for biodiversity. And I think with that respect, you know, change the law to help them, to help what's left, you know, and the wonderful success story that plant life have had behind these meadows, you know, continues.
Hugo, we often hear about rewilding now, and I am an artist fan, I have to confess. Is rewilding a similar thing, or is it completely different? Or
I'm no expert, but I did actually meet with Isabella Tree, discuss it, and her view, in fact, you know, to see if they would be included, but her view was quite clear that they wouldn't interfere at all. So if one of their wild animals or semi-wild animals went and ate all the wildflowers, so be it. Mm-hmm. And she said it was a bit of a wildflower desert. So she would lend her support. There's no point in me photographing there. But that would depend on how you rewild it. I mean, they have, though it's wild, they have animals they cull for meat, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Remind me where they're based.
Down in by Dorset, right? By Sussex, sorry. So if it was in Scotland, you wouldn't have that problem, really.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it depends, but I don't think they're necessarily, well, certainly they're not a wildflower's best friend. That particular example.
So I must admit, just looking at these photographs makes me feel as though it's summer. You know, it's quite mild outside today, but this just lifts my spirits.
Yes, well, I think you timed it well, Antonia. It's just felt warm today. Spring.
It has.
Hope is in the air.
Yes.
And well, that takes us on to actually the creator of the idea at Highgrove, so Prince Charles's Meadow there. And, you know, my view as a photographer is there are basically three types of meadow. The recreated one, which Highgrove would be an example. So it has been recreated as close as possible to what would have been there. And I think it's well known that Dame Miriam Rothschild helped with the seeds and sourcing the seeds locally 30 odd years ago. And that type of meadow is just wonderful. I mean, I've probably been the only person who's been then not on a tour, so you can go round Highgrove, you know, on my own. So I felt absolutely blessed because there are so many orchids. It's quite impressive, and of course, he's donated as part of the Coronation Meadows initiative, and I think that's why it's been such a success. You know, he really is a heartfelt believer and has kindly written a foreword for the book. So hats off. And then the next slide is it's a different view of a different meadow. And unfortunately, I think I was only in there one day, so you get what's around that day rather than following through the seasons, which would have been nice because they've got quite a range of flowers there. But I think what's interesting is in this type of recreated meadow, you've got the closeness of the actual formal garden. So I like that shot because you see the topiary and the hedges behind, and it sort of flows into this wildflower meadow. So it's a lovely juxtaposition. Whereas Ranscombe, where we've been talking about, or Parkgate Down, they're just wild. They're just wild.
It must be wonderful to be able to look out of that window or any of those windows and see, as you say, the contrast between the formal gardens and then that fabulous meadow.
Yes, and it's so English in a way, because I don't think you get this in France, and you have those very formal gardens around the chateaux, which were imported to England as a concept, and if you like, are the antithesis of Capability Brown. But at Highgrove, he has a mixture really of all types, including the very informal, very much more informal English style garden, if you like. The next slide sort of shows wonderful paths.
Yeah.
And it does feel summery. I can feel it coming, Antonia.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Absolutely. Is it your favourite one, Hugo?
It's definitely my favourite of the recreated ones. Yeah. And then Mooka, which is a wild meadow up in Yorkshire, is probably my favourite of the wild. That was the great thing in a way, because I travelled all over the country, from Mull down to Cornwall, through to Sandringham, in fact, which is the next slide. In the east, the soil is so different, so the conditions are so different. The planting is completely different. I was really surprised. I hadn't been to such a sort of diverse set of landscapes, with the garden photography. So it was really exciting, actually. I loved it. So here we have, again, Prince Charles is well known for his environmental views. So it is one of the greener estates around, I think, and it's just a big sky area in Norfolk around Sandringham. Yes. And the next slide, I think, shows I was lucky with the weather as well. Wow. Sun streaming in, and same again on the next one. So it's nice to have the Queen's Meadow in there for the coronation. Then we move on to a different type altogether, Chatsworth, which again is being recreated by the Duke of Devonshire, but with help. So the next slide, people might recognise some of the elements. If anyone was at the Chelsea Flower Show in 2015, this was the gold winner, created by Dan Pearson, and I was photographing at the show, so I actually didn't realise myself that they brought it back up to Chatsworth.
Oh, right.
Those giant stones are the size of, that's the size of a cottage. And it was in the middle of a display at Chelsea. Rear left of the shot is, it looks like a burnt trunk, and it is, but it's a work of, it's intentionally done. So it's a sort of reminder of old and new. It's sort of artwork, which is also down at the exhibition. So it's really extraordinary seeing it back in the rolling hills of Derbyshire. But I think, rather like the wilding, it's something people, feel, is right. And so he's trying to do a much more informal garden with Dan, which has these wilder flowers. And well done them winning the show. It's quite incredible. And another quite new one is the next slide, which is Highclere, or the real Downton Abbey as it's now known. But again, the Earl of Carnarvon was, I think, one of the few people to get up at 4 a.m, come and see how I was getting on. He was very, he's very passionate about it, and that's, you know, the power these flowers have. The reason is, once you've been in one of these big meadows at its peak, you know, because let's be honest, they don't last all year. But if you hit one in their peak, it's for me, it was sort of life-changing. It was a life-changing experience. It was just so wonderful. They're so alive. I felt guilty about having my, you know, my lawn, because it's so dead by comparison. But yeah, no, they absolutely love it, and fondly, as you can see in the next.
Hugo, sorry, before we move on, what time of year was this? Because you mentioned, you know, how stunning they are.
Yeah.
Well, so
some wildflowers start in April.
Right.
Some will go, you know, late September, August, but the majority are, you know, May, June, and July. Right. And so that, in a way, as a photographer, is one of the challenges, is trying to get around the country in time when they're all out. And I didn't succeed in all of them at all, because it was in one summer, and it was the hottest summer. So they had a bit of mist at the start of the day, made it a bit more romantic. And of course, a lot of these houses were landscaped by Capability Brown. So I don't think we've got that image. Let's see. No, but Highclere is one of them. So there's a statue of him looking down over this meadow, in fact. And you can only imagine he'd be frowning, rather unsure of what this is doing next to his creation.
Although he did like a natural looking landscape, didn't he?
Yes.
So and like you, he travelled the length and breadth of the country to achieve it. So I think you have quite a lot in common.
Yeah. So then we're on to the same misty morning, which luckily cleared at Highclere. So yeah, it is very romantic. It fits in, I think, this romantic notion of the English countryside, which takes us to the next slide, which is perhaps the most unlikely of the lot, which is the 90th meadow, planted in the middle of London, Green Park next to Hyde Park Corner, you can see in the background there, and next to Buckingham Palace. So the Queen's Meadow is keeping an eye on the Queen, and it was planted again in her 90th year. So it's the 90th meadow, 90th year. And Prince Charles, I don't know how he managed it, he managed to persuade the council to allow him with a horse and old-fashioned plough in there. So they ploughed it up in the traditional way. And then all the local schools were involved as part of their nature and biology studies, and helped seed it and then study its progress. So it's part of, you know, the educational package now. So it's very cleverly done, and it was really stunning. Again, you can see I picked the right day.
Yes.
And it's just a sharp reminder of how, you know, how wonderful nature is. And there it is, right in the middle of that great city. The next shot, I think, shows...
Hugo, sorry, before we move on, there's a question from Marie Berensky, and her question, actually, you've pretty much just answered. She said, are there any urban meadows, or is that a contradiction? What about the London parks? So there you go.
There we go.
So I hope, Marie, that answers your question. And let's go on to the next slide. Sorry. Too many.
So that's, excuse me, just a different view of it. And this, as you can see, it hasn't got as broad a range of species yet, but that'll develop. This was might have been year 4, 5, I forget exactly. But it's, quite early days, so it'll change every year. And then just as I was packing up, if you go to the next slide, I heard this weird sound penetrating as I was trying to take the sound of the traffic going around Hyde Park out of my ears, and I realized it was horses. It must be the lifeguards.
Yes.
Indeed it was. I just ran to try and capture them. And I think, I think it's so great that you have a jogger going around it, someone walking to work, going about their business, and what could be more English than the red bus in the top one, or the ceremonial guards in this one. But I think it's a great symbol to have in the middle of the city. Yeah.
It's quite unique, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there would be other nature reserves. There's 1 or 2 big woods. I think Highgate has a big wood. I did one photo shoot in there. But I haven't actually looked, answer to Maria's question, for the other wild parks in London. But most of those big areas would have at least a section. So Hackney Marshes obviously was in the east of London, a marshy area. And I know in Holland Park, they have a whole wildlife habitat area, which they use for the schools, and they all come around and chase the tadpoles. So I think there's probably a few more little bits scattered around, but not anything of this scale. Then 25 shows us one of my 2 equal, completely natural meadows, the other type of meadow. So Jones Hill Farm is Coronation Meadow, and it's under Plant Life's care. And what's so breathtaking about this is just the range of colours and the scale of it. I'd never seen anything like it before. It's field after field of these just fields of flowers, and you just, I don't know, it just took my breath away. And you think, gosh, people would respond differently to nature or to the countryside if it looked like that, or on a field of rape. So it's finding that sort of balance between the commercial need and the planet's needs, I guess. But it was a great reminder of how things were, and how they are in some areas. Coming back now.
I think also when you look at something like that, if you add to it the sound of bees and other insects and butterflies floating around and the warmth of the sun, there's nothing better, is there?
No, well, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think my favourite wild meadow, as I mentioned, was this one, Mooker, which, if you imagine the quite deep valleys of Yorkshire, it's North Yorkshire, then you imagine typical Yorkshire weather in the summer. So it's raining, grey, and quite windy. And I just thought, oh no, I'm running out of time. I've got to get to Mull to do these other meadows. What am I going to do? So I gave it another day. And this time, luckily, the forecast was wrong. There was a few seconds of sunshine. I mean, literally, that's all. But it was enough. So I'm up at 4, it's still grey. The valley would stop the sunlight hitting the meadow anyway till a bit later. And when some sunlight hit it, it just brought it to life. And obviously, as a photographer relies entirely on the light outside. And then the sound came in, as you say, the sound effect, and it was it's quite deafening, because that meadow is say in a valley, so it almost feels like the sound is sort of echoing back on itself. And Mooker is, thinking of their protection, Mooker means, it's a Nordic word, Viking word, meaning new meadow, new narrow pasture. Emphasis being on the new bit, because the Vikings first invaded York in 880 odd AD. So
I have to pass on that one.
Then, and I just, it could easily go tomorrow, but it's thanks to this wonderful, small holder. There's a couple of fields, and he just won't farm it. He leaves it like that, and it has a really ancient sort of wooden stones through the middle for some reason. So it sort of has natural protection. It gets so many walkers there. It's on one of the sort of big routes there, and a lot of people going through it when I was there. And I luckily ran into them at the end by chance, and they were so charming, and they just it inspires you. They absolutely loved it. The sheepdog absolutely loved me. I thought he was going to. So I did think, when the sun came up, the sound of the bees and all these other pollinators, and they don't have, the rare plants of the monkey orchid. It's just a full range of them. Mm-hmm. So you have these different levels of color from the different flowers. And I just thought, well, if I was to pass away, I can't think of a place that's close to paradise on earth. I really can't. I mean, you don't have to go anywhere. We've got these gems of, natural heritage, in this country. So if anyone's up in Yorkshire, definitely try and find Mooka. It's a lovely walk as well.
Okay. Should we go to the next one?
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
Yes, so that links us from the coronation, my great honor of photographing the Queen for the longest reign coronation period, and how, this was the book we made out of it, but if you go to the next slide, you can see Antonia.
Sorry.
You can see a bit more clearly how we did it, which actually was quite complicated because it was all shot in camera. But the point, I think, of partially of showing these is we used the same lighting and techniques on the flower studio shots that we're coming to, which was part of the challenge of trying to make these invisible flowers more visible. Mm-hmm. So this is the Lady Chief Justice, and you can see it's mirrored on the bottom. And the reason you've got three images is there's giant mirrors behind her. So you think about it, I'm bound to be reflected in the shot as I'm standing right in front of her, in front of the mirrors. So we had to build this giant blackout so that you don't get series joining.
Of course, I never thought of that. And so the Queen's People was a collection of photographs of people that served the Queen. And did you photograph them all in their regalia and uniforms and things?
Yes, I mean, the thing is, I think, even this form of heritage, the uniform, which we're so respected for, is under enormous threat because of the simple cost involved. You can't repair them and renew these. Often they had actual gold thread. You couldn't do that, obviously, in this day and age. And so I think part of the idea was, so it's really all the people who had, these quite tough jobs. I mean, that Lady Chief Justice, I'm sure, breakfasted on nails. She was tough as a woman. She had to be. She dealt with some of the IRA bombing cases and everything. But it's very, very beautiful to catch the regalia before it disappears, really. And then the next slide is the Scottish bodyguard ceremonial, but is the Archers of Scotland. I think they're all chosen because of their height to form a good human shield around the Queen. And then we've got Prince William, of course. And I can't say that was the smoothest day in my life, that one.
Why? What happened, Hugo?
You
can tell me in complete confidence.
Right, Antonia, yes. Well, it was the day of St. Patrick's Day, so he and the Duchess were there at the Irish Guards. She was very heavily pregnant, in fact, at the time, and so it's good of him to agree to do the photograph. I think there'd been some hitch, not confirmed, anyway, alleged hitch in the costume. And so he literally appeared, and he had to be on parade at 11 o'clock because it was St. Patrick's Day and they were presenting the shamrocks to the Irish Guards. He's Colonel-in-Chief. So I'd taken my shirt off, I'd taken my jacket off rather, and I was holding my head, and I can't believe it, because it's quite a tricky operation getting down there, getting set up before 11. And dealing with all the military security and everything else. Yeah.
And this was at Windsor Castle, wasn't it?
This was actually at Aldershot.
Oh right, okay.
Yeah, the Queen. No, if we come back to that, yeah, we do. It was at Windsor, and I just thought it's really sad. And anyway, by that time, Kate had come down and was absolutely grilling me on the photography process, because we had the whole mirrors set up and the blackout curtains, and it only become apparent later why she's a keen and talented photographer herself. She was absolutely grilling us. I asked her if she'd step in while we waited for her husband, but she was very smart, was not falling for that one, being photographed while pregnant. So literally hats off to Prince William for coming down there, being incredibly cool and calm. I really admired his sanguine with about 1 minute to go before the parade. And yeah, it's very, very, very impressive.
I suppose he has the advantage that they're not going to start without him, are they?
No.
To be fair. And I mean, he always comes over as being such a charming, I was going to say young man, he's a man. Can I go to the next picture? Because I think
he caught me with my jacket. I was just so delighted, as you can see, that he let us squeeze it in there.
That's really super.
Impressive king he'll make.
Yeah, I think so.
The next shot, I think, shows the Queen, doesn't it?
Yes. So just as an observation, so all her people are in full regalia, and here's the Queen looking, I mean, I hesitate to use the word, but almost naked, no gloves, no hat, no coat.
Yes, well,
what were you thinking?
Negotiation with the royal household, I think. She wanted, I think, well, to tell the full story, they'd had the Annie Leibovitz shots the year before, and as you know, some of them didn't go according to plan. Just leave it like that. And they were quite formal shots. I think she actually asked her, I think it's publicly recorded, to take the crown off, which is not like just taking a hat off. So, so I had to go with the flow slightly, and so we discussed that there's a lot of red in the other royal costumes, not so much the ones we're showing, but the Beefeater, which is on the cover, is red. It's quite commonly used in these uniforms, and so we had that, and a very gentle, if you like, modern hint at the military. She's wearing the badge of the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards. She's Colonel-in-Chief. And the other thing I owe to Annie Leibovitz was she photographed her in the green drawing room at Windsor Castle. So they were insistent we were in not in the green drawing room. And of course, I hadn't let on fully the extent of the set we were going to build at all, though they'd seen, you know, a rough of the image, the end result. So as you only have a, you know, very limited time, we obviously had to plan it very precisely, and had full rehearsals, time, obviously the amount of time I would spend speaking to the Queen, because you could, I don't know, if you had a lot longer, you could spend a long time chatting to somebody to make sure you know, you're on the same wavelength and they understand what you're doing and relaxed. It's the most important.
Yes.
So I thought, well, I'll cut that short really. The Queen's so experienced. I would just talk about the regiment a bit and then launch into it. And that was all fine. We were setting up, let's say, in the white drawing room. Well, I missed that bit out really, but so we went to the white drawing room, but we've set up this giant blackout curtain. It obviously didn't matter where we were.
That's true.
Other than there was only 2 inches clearance to the chandelier above us for the main light. So we just made it, and the crew were pretty young, so very nervous. And, you know, our timings were to pot. We should have had about 45 to 50 minutes spare from arrival. You're not allowed to arrive before 8 o'clock at the castle, set up, and her entry. So what I really wanted to do was a walkthrough, because the 3 different lighting setups, we did 3 different shots in our short period of time. And I finally looked over at my lighting guy. You know, I couldn't understand what was taking so long. His hand was shaking like a jelly, literally, from across the room. So I realized, you know, I wasn't the only one feeling the nerves, even if I was trying not to show it. So we didn't have time for a walkthrough. We had time just to get it set up, just to jump out of our work clothes into our suits to be introduced, and all facing the door, smiling, ready, just. And we hear a click behind us, and there's a secret door in the bookcase. So we all jump around just in time to see the Queen have probably one of her biggest surprises, that to find out her white drawing room has been turned into a black drawing room.
I think we've got a picture of that, haven't we?
I don't think much exposed her though. She recovered in about 2.5 seconds. And the silver cloud of this whole shoot was my camera broke down. She was the 50th one. It had no mechanical problems. As you can imagine, if you're photographing the Queen, you know, you got your best camera out there. So I'd harnessed Hasselblad, so Rolls Royce of cameras, and it broke down halfway through. And I'd actually practiced going, I can't, you know, F believe it's happened now, saying something different. So I did that bit right.
Well done.
I said to her, Mum, you know, it's digital camera, I'm afraid. It's not like the old-fashioned cameras, and they occasionally have a digital breakdown. This one has. Repair it in 2 minutes, or I've got 2 spare cameras. I said, that's fine, just fix it. So I then realized I'd be chatting to her for that time, and that's when I actually got my best shot. So even the greatest pro, you know, I think appreciates, you know, a bit of understanding about the shots.
Yeah,
it all turned out very well in the end, and they seemed to be very happy. So the next,
she looks so relaxed in that photo, doesn't she?
No, that was after my horse joke, which I can't repeat, Antonio. Giving her in the Derby, so I researched up on that.
Oh, well done.
The next shot shows the setup a bit.
Yeah,
so,
I mean that's just incredible, isn't it? When you see that and then see what the end result is, it's just.
So that's the mirrors on the ground, and I'm walking out of the blackout set, so I'm not in the shot. No, it's an amazing experience. And so fantastic. The next shot shows the next slide, Antonio, shows using the same mirrors, in fact. So we used exactly the same mirrors, so last use, I think, which allows the flower of Oxfordshire, no less, plant life's flower for Oxfordshire is the snake's head fritillary. And you obviously have to be very careful which flowers you can present in this way, because a lot of them are protected. There's a little bit on that in the book. And there's something just felt very naked about seeing them with their roots just suspended there. Well, quite majestic in a way. And then the next slide allows us to see the incredible colours. I'd never realised just how much variation there is in each of the petals, more or less with each flower. They really are a wonderful flower. And the thing about these shots and the mirror shots is obviously those shot in the studio, so we don't have any wind.
Yes.
So that's one problem out of the way, and we can control the lighting. But the problem you do have is vibration. So everyone had to bring their best soft slippers, not to cause vibration on the floor. It's all a bit nutty. But if you take the, really, you have to get quite nerdy about it to get it right, I suppose, is what I'm saying. And the image on the left of the snake head is a multi-stack. So it's probably 15 images in there. Because at that level we couldn't, it's on a light box, like a giant, like, you could have for your slides at home, but it's like a giant one we built out of a table, some glass and everything. And, so you have to be incredibly still and very precise. Otherwise it doesn't fit together when you composite afterwards. And the next slide, again, is on the light box, and I just think it's just the most beautiful flowers. It's really great. And the good news is all those are photographed for anyone who's local at the Magdalen College meadow in Oxford, which I think you have to pay to get into, but my opinion was worth it. So it's a giant meadow of them. I've never seen anything like it before, and has a great history in that Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, all these great Oxford writers all used to walk around there. And it's mentioned in their writings.
Wow.
So then we're on to the coronation itself, which is, I suppose, the thing that links it all together.
It is.
This is actually the essay from the book by the royal author and journalist Robert Hardman, and it's a lovely essay pointing out, when I find it, the elements, in a way, how the Queen, the royal family, have always been linked to our green and pleasant land. So within that Norman Hartnell coronation dress, is covered with thousands of seed pearls made of white satin, embroidered with all the emblems of the United Kingdom and indeed the Commonwealth, which in those days was much smaller. It's just a few countries, in fact. So you have the rose for England, thistle for Scotland, leek for Wales, shamrock for Ireland, lotus flower for India and Ceylon, sugar bush flower for South Africa, wattle blossom Australia, wheat and jute for Pakistan, maple leaf for Canada, and a fern, of course, for New Zealand. Well, now it's 56 countries, I think, the Commonwealth.
My goodness.
So you have a bit of a job putting them all in. I think it's rather wonderful and appropriate, therefore, that the Coronation Meadows are so named. All those wonderful flowers being on that coronation dress and indeed her wedding dress. And I think you're the expert on the next slide.
Yes, so we wanted to just kind of link your book and the coronation a little bit to Blenheim. So just very briefly, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the dukes and duchesses that had been involved in the coronation, or various coronations. So on the left, we have the 9th Duke's wife, Consuelo Vanderbilt, and she's there in her magnificent coronation robes with her two sons. The tall gentleman standing went on to become the 10th Duke, and in fact that's him on the photograph on the right. So Consuelo was at the coronation of Edward VII.
Wow.
And then Bert, as the 10th Duke was known, and Mary, 10th Duke and Duchess. That's a photograph of them at the coronation of George V. No, George VI, tell a lie. But I thought what was really interesting as well, it's these families hand down all their regalia. As you say, it's so expensive to reproduce. But the Duchesses are both wearing the same dress, which we still have at Blenheim. So that's rather nice. And then...
Amazing. God, imagine being at the coronation.
Well, exactly. But then it gets even better. So there's the 10th Duchess again at the coronation of our Queen, so in 1953, with her granddaughter. And then her own daughter, the 10th Duchess's daughter, Lady Rosemary Spencer-Churchill, as she was then, was one of the maids of honour at the Queen's coronation.
Best view in the house. How amazing.
Well, how amazing. And interestingly, you can see it's dated the 2nd day of June 1953, the coronation. And Lady Rosemary was due to be married, and she had to postpone her wedding because the maids of honour all had to be single. So she couldn't get married beforehand. And I must admit, I would have put my wedding off.
Yeah, I would.
And they received all sorts of newspaper coverage, as you can imagine. That's just a little cutting there. And that's a photograph of them in their beautiful dresses on the balcony. And again, it's rather nice because it's so informal. They're looking all over the place. But just to go back to what you were saying about the Queen's dress, you can see it there.
And much better shot.
Yeah, you can see in detail the elements that you were talking about, which are beautiful. I read earlier, I was kind of looking up the different emblems, and apparently Norman Hartnell had assumed that a daffodil was the emblem for Wales, and he was given short shrift and told, no, it has to be a leek. And there was no way that they were going to give way on that, quite rightly. And then that's one of the maids of honour's dresses. And again, he picked out some of the elements from the floral elements from the Queen's dress to complement that. And that's a picture of them all together there.
Beautiful.
And not to be outdone, so Lady Rosemary is second from the left there. And her brother, who later became the 11th Duke, that's a photograph of him in the Life Guards. And he rode as part of the Guard of Honour for this rather wonderful lady, who was the Queen of Tonga. And apparently it was pouring with rain that day. It was a horrible day. And still she went with an open carriage and she was waving to everyone. She became an instant hit. And a few days later, at Blenheim, there was a garden party for the Commonwealth members, the guests, and you can see the Duke with Princess Margaret, and there's Queen Salote of Tonga on the steps at Blenheim. And then just to bring it a little bit further forward in time, when it was the Queen's Golden Jubilee, Lady Rosemary was invited to a lunch and a service at Westminster Abbey to celebrate 50 years. And that's just a little menu showing you what they had to eat on that occasion. And it looks all right. It's perfectly acceptable. So that's our little kind of Blenheim tie into that. Hugo, we've had loads of questions. If you're happy to take some of these questions. But before we do, that's just a cover of your book there. And I know someone was asking when the book is out. So it's out now and it's available.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Mother's Day is just around the corner. I'd like to remind everyone. So,
Wildflowers for Mother's Day, yes.
Absolutely.
Flowers that last for forever, come to think of it. Yeah.
That's very true. So, Hugo, can I try some of these questions on you?
Yeah.
So it says, thank you for, this is Emily Reed. Thank you for a fascinating presentation. Our back garden in Adderbury is being overtaken by moles and fox currently. Any tips on how to overcome the moles?
Well,
or is this not your field of expertise?
It's not my field of expertise. I mean, I do see the mole traps, but I'm not sure if they're even legal these days, how people do it. Yeah. I think you can divert them with sound through the tunnels, but I'm afraid I approach the wildflower meadows as a photographer, and very much, I apologize, as a completely amateur botanist, but I do sympathize. We've got a fox here, and
yeah,
it's quite.
I think the thing about moles is they're such lovely creatures, and if only they wouldn't make big holes, or big mounds. And Emily does go on to say, we're a bit late in planting new additions to our borders. Any suggestions on what we could add that would help bees and other species?
Well, I mean, I kind of go with colour in a way, and influenced by, the colours that you like. The colour's going to work best with what you've got there, but also your seasonal interest. So we try and have in the garden here sort of range through the different seasons. So it's not all a wham bam in the summer. So now we've got quite a lot of aconites, the wood anemones, snowdrops coming through, for instance. So I think that, that's one way to look at it, is try and spread the seasons of the garden out a bit more, and the borders would take those very well, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So another question from Emily. I think Prince Charles needs more credit for the huge amount of work he's done over many decades to champion the need to look after our environment. What can we all do to become his advocates on this issue?
Well, I think that's a great question, because I mean, I agree. I think he hasn't had the support he deserves on this, really. So I think it's great that he's patron of this charity, Plant Life, and you don't need land to support the wildflower meadows at all. I mean, I think, you can start just with, excuse me, with a window box even, because that would take all your seasonal changing flowers, which are still wildflowers. But I think the way I would approach it is in a way adopting a flower or one of the Plant Life meadows that you like, which could be local or particular flower, like the Monkey Orchid I particularly love. And in Oxfordshire, as I mentioned, the county plant is the Snake's Head Fritillary. So that you can do it through support for your county flower. You'll be pleased to know, Antonia, the Gloucestershire Flower is the daffodil. So I think, and equally, I think, I love it. If you go to one of these wildflower meadows, with family, children love it. And I think it's great fun trying to count how many different wildflowers there are there, because you just wouldn't believe it. As I say, there were 50 at Blenheim through the season, but it's an incredible place to spend time. So I think that's one way. Buying the book does actually help, because profits from sales go to the charity Plant Life, and you can buy that off my website. In fact, at the moment, I'm not sure it's in Amazon, everything yet.
Are there any signed copies available? One of our listeners has asked.
Well, I think probably only when we get to your Blenheim Flower Show.
Okay, so
there during the lockdown period, but we can definitely try if somebody wants to send through a request. Otherwise, I think we are coming to your flower show, so we can make sure
So Hugo's going to be speaking live at our flower show, which is scheduled for June. Now, it's an outdoor event, so hopefully, in view of what the Prime Minister was saying on Monday evening, it will run. So there'll be details of that on our website, so you'll be able to go along and meet him while he signed your book.
Wow. And then finally, you've got, oh, my favourite I see coming up, Mooka Meadow.
Oh, yes, hold on.
Wonderful Dr. or Professor Trevor Dines from Plant Life, who I owe a debt of gratitude to for putting me onto the correct meadows at the right time.
Okay, so as you say, this is your, oops, sorry, this is your favourite. Oh, that's all gone horribly wrong. Just a moment. Stop now. There was always going to be a technical hitch at one stage.
Well, you've done incredibly well.
Hold on, I won't be beaten. Here we go.
Nestled in a valley beside the River Swale, Mooka is a landscape of flowers, a ribbon of 12 meadows carpeting the valley floor and creating a floral paradise like nowhere else in Britain. And scattered across the valley are ancient stone barns that once stored hay from the meadows. Solid and belligerent in this otherwise soft landscape, they remind us of the close but delicate bond between wildflower meadows and farming. If we get that balance wrong, we can destroy these meadows in the blink of an eye. Mooka is utterly fabulous, but it's also utterly heartbreaking, for this is what we've lost.
Well, we have lost, but it's coming back. So I think there's an upbeat to that, which is, Plant Life are doing an incredible job. Prince Charles's vision, I think, was amazing, and he was ahead of his time. Only people now are really realizing the importance of the biodiversity gains, apart from just the aesthetic pleasure, but the really important job they do on the planet. And so I think it's all moving in the right direction. And we end appropriately with the Oxfordshire County Flower, Snake's Head Fritillary. And so thank you all so much for listening, joining us tonight, and obviously an enormous thanks to Blenheim Estate and their graces the Duke and Duchess of Marlborough for allowing this to happen on the estate and be in the book. So thank you so much, Antonio.
Hugo, thank you. And thank you for joining us this evening. It's been lovely to have you all here. If you do have any further questions, if you drop an email to me at Blenheim, and then we can take that forward. But thank you for your support, and I hope you'll join me next week when I will telling you a little bit about what happens when Hollywood descends on Blenheim. So it's a talk called Lights, Camera, Action, and it looks at some of the filming that's taken place at Blenheim even. So on that note, hope to see you next week. Hugo, thank you so very much, and good night.
Thank you, Antonio. Night, night.
Bye. Bye-bye.